All right, good morning. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name wasn't on the agenda. I'm learning things over time. Oh, here we go. Thank you there, Mr. Mayor. Nate Berga had an exposure issue, but it was a good one. COD came in. They had the big wind event, over the weekend, we all remember, and the boats couldn't come in, couldn't get out and fish. They're on their way in. He's swamped, so Nate has got a higher priority day, and I got the shorts job. So we're going to talk. I want to talk a little bit about ASA, which is an organization that was formed probably about 5 or 6 years ago. It kind of really turned to focus more on fishing issues in terms of the economy and the seafood economy, not just the salmon economy. And I think that's kind of important because a lot of people don't really see the connectivity of the fishery and the seafood industry across the peninsula and how it sort of is interconnected. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And like most of the other organizations, talk about healthy salmon and how to try to have some sort of predictability for the industry. Anybody who lives in this area or visits this area knows that fish is like the third rail of what you talk about. All right, so I'm not here to talk about allocation and who catches what and who gets a picture. That's not my thing. What I want to try to do is give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on in the economic picture of the industry, peninsula-wide, and then talk specifically about what Tim put me on the hook for, which is this issue about what's going on in Cook Inlet and could happen this summer and have a dramatic impact on the seafood economy throughout the entire peninsula. So that's it. We know we've got economic values, and I'm kind of glad to hear we tie in a lot about the social component of economic growth and economic benefit. So there's obviously some components there, and then we'll go through a little bit of this regulatory challenge. I'm not arguing the argument either way. What I did is I culled out information I've received from some of the documents that have been involved and filed, and I'm just sort of summarizing those. So you just get kind of an idea what it is. If you want to argue about fishing, I see Todd's here. Let's see, we got the mayor, we got some other people, we've got some holdovers from their youth, the city manager. So a lot of us have some different views of it, and that's good. I just want to kind of give you an idea of what's going on with the big picture. So we heard earlier that the Kenai Peninsula was host to 3 of the top 10 seafood ports in the United States. That's kind of a historical data set. The current data set is much different. You can see that over the last first 7 years since 2010, collective average was about 116 million, and that's sort of seafood in general. All right, it's all connected. If you have a plant, you can process some fish, salmon season, cod, shoulder season, halibut. A lot of resources come in from outside of the inlet, outside of the Kenai Peninsula, and get processed in Cook Inlet. Those fish aren't really considered part of the economic value because those aren't landings. So this 116 million. So look what's happened over the last few years. We've gone from 3 in the top 10 to barely have 3 in the top 100. Okay, so that's kind of see the precipitous decline in the value of. Now you can argue about the price of fish and some other things, but in general, that's a pretty steep decline in what's going on in the macro industry. Payroll, give you kind of an idea, year round, it's about 635 FTEs, kind of a nice little full-time equivalent, and about a $7.5, almost $8 million payroll depending upon the year. And that's year round, okay? Of that, and included in that, not including that, excuse me, is about 21 million a year just in the Central Peninsula. So OBI and the Packstar Seafood Company, they've got just about 21 million in expenses. I don't know if that's the electrical bill, Brad. It might be part of that. I don't know. But it's a pretty good chunk of dough that gets distributed, and it's distributed all over. It goes through a whole variety of different services and supplies. And I know I'm the only thing between you and lunch, so I'm going to do my best. On the social side, a lot of people think about the traditional view of fishing was people come from outside, catch the fish, they take their money and go home. Well, as a matter of fact, Cook Inlet has the highest percentage of Alaska permit holders in just about any fishery in the state. You can go out to Quaylock or out on the Yukon River, and those are mostly small towns. But I mean, in terms of a diverse population like we have on the peninsula, about 80% are permit holders, and which means 80% of the harvest value stays in the area for the most part, which is kind of important because we want to see that economic turnover kick over and over and over, and that adds a lot of juice. That's a lot of tennis shoes. That's a lot of things at Sweeney's. And what a lot of people don't know is how much fish goes into the local marketplace. So about almost 2.5, some seasons, 3 million pounds of processed product from the peninsula goes into the South Central Food Distribution Network. So actually a lot of the fish, it's a high percentage, is actually feeding Alaskans, which is an important thing to kind of keep in mind. So what's going on in the regulatory thing? Okay, this is the third rail, so I'll try to be as objective as I can after 40 years as a fisherman. What we've seen over time is, and the only way I'm going to talk about allocation, that's a social policy, okay? Allocation to social policy. Who gets what, for what reason? People make those policy calls. When you're talking about what's actually happened, you've seen over time a reduction in the fishing, a lot of gear and area restrictions, to the point where some of the actual resource harvesters in Cook Inlet fish with half the gear they used to be able to fish with for half the time. So you functionally cut that fleet by 50%. Even though you have the same number of people participating, their gear and their areas have shrunk and been reduced. Cook Inlet, primarily the sockeye, is managed by escapement goals. Escapement goals are numbers that biologists come up with to say how many fish can we get in the pasture and how many come back. Okay, that's the yield. And that's kind of the important concept, because what we've seen over time is these escapement goals change. And you all know the visitor that comes up and says, well, my cousin came up last year and had a good fishing season. Why isn't it good this fishing season? Well, fish run on a multiple year cycle. So when you start changing things year to year to year, it adds a lot of confusion. And that's been sort of an issue that's resulted in over escapement. The more cows you have on the pasture, the less cows you have to harvest, right? The more fish you get up, the less that come back. That's just math. And what we've seen has happened, Cook Inlet was the second largest salmon run in the state for many, many years. Remember, we grew up here, you'd want them to turn the fish off, there were so many fish. Now we're down to about 2 million fish, typically on an average season. And in fact, the dip net harvest and the escapement goals exceed the entire harvest of the commercial fishery. It's a lot of fish that's going somewhere that's not into the economy necessarily. Now, I like fish on my plate like everybody else, but from an economic standpoint, what's happened to the industry, that's a pretty significant shift. So, what's going on? Part of Cook Inlet is in federal waters from a fishing standpoint, between 3 and 12 miles offshore or further. So Senator Stevens and Senator Magnuson got together years ago and they said, well, we need to take a look at the national policy for fish. And what's interesting is federal fish are managed in the Department of Commerce. It's all about the economic value of the resource to the community, the resource to the nation, and how it can be managed over time. There's 10 national standards. You can Google it, pretty easy, but it's protect fishing communities, make resource allocation, optimize the yield, try to manage the resource so you get as many back as possible for the great benefit of the community and the nation. Anadromous fish, I see Mayor Marquardt, I've never really met her, but she's from Dutch Harbor. Big fishing port, right? Right up there in the top 2 or 3. And pelagic fish primarily, cod, pollock, things that just swim out in big circles out in the ocean. Anadromous fish were carved out as special because they typically spawn in state waters, but they live in federal waters. So Magnuson tried to connect the dots and make sure there was a management structure that maximized the benefit of those resources to the nation. And to do that, you have to have a fisheries management plan. Agencies love plans, right? We're going to come up with a plan. We're going to get some experts to help us with a plan. It could take 2 years, it could take 10 years, but you're supposed to have some sort of a structure that has industry and the resource have some predictability. So here's the EEZ in Cook Inlet. The line was drawn kind of arbitrarily years ago from Anchor Point straight across, and it goes almost all the way up to Calgon Island. It's a big chunk of real estate, and a lot of fishing activity occurs there. About half the drift fishery occurs in that area. What happened was some of the fishermen said, well, we fish in this area and we don't think we're being managed where we're supposed to under federal law. So what we'd like to do is have the state continue managing the resource and maybe just follow the 10 national standards so we can maximize the opportunities for everybody to be involved. What's happened is a court ordered the state and the federal government to say, you actually have to follow Magnuson in this area, and we want you to do that. So over 2 years of committees and how many different committee meetings and commissions, they worked through a process, and when they got to the end, the state decided they did not want to manage in that area anymore. And National Marine Fisheries said, well, if you're not going to manage in that area, we're going to close it down. So they're going to close it down this summer, 2022. So the closure is planned for 2022. That decision is currently pending in a federal court in Anchorage. But the point is it's not like the fish are going away. It's not like there's a conservation problem. It's sort of a square off between a couple of agencies with jurisdiction over the resource. So what's that mean? Well, they went through the public process, and the decision to close was brought up as an amendment when they were getting ready to make the decision. They evaluated 3 options. At the last minute, a 4th option came up, and it was to close, which meant that all the public process that had gone on for 2 years never considered this as an option. It was never on the table, never discussed. Now all of a sudden, people go to a meeting, someone has a motion, we're going to close it, so it's going to be closed in 2022. So it's about a half reduction in the drift fleet. What it does is it affects the access to capability for the regional ports. All the processing companies are codependent. Fish that comes in from Homer or Seward comes to Kenai. Boxes that are in Kenai go to Seward. So it's all connected. So that 48% reduction affects everybody because it brings down the opportunity to have sort of more widgets go through your factory to keep your plant going. The consequences to the management are unknown. What will happen with escapement? How many fish will go up the river? What will be the consequences of that on the future return? And certainly there was no analysis of the economic impact. The record basically states that there will be no impact to the economy of the Kenai Peninsula if we shut down this historic fishery. So that's kind of where it stands. So, I know you're all hungry. Quick takeaways. It's a pretty major industry, and the salmon industry is part of the regional seafood economy. Those are 2 different things, okay? It's like a multiple leg stool. So having the salmon is an important component. So if you take that leg away, it starts to make the other elements of the stool falter. It's going to make it much harder to keep Homer open, for instance, lose a lot of seafood activity, or Seward for that matter. Having fish come from the inlet going to Seward to be processed. They've made a lot of changes, and this is essentially what's before the court right now. Can the policy makers make these changes without having a sufficient understanding of what's gone on to the impact, not just to the economy, but to the ripples in the community? Fishing communities are specifically spelled out as sort of a protected group under Magnuson. And ultimately what actually happens to the salmon resource itself. That's sort of the main issue that people are concerned about. As long as there's plenty of fish, there's plenty of opportunity for people to catch them, whether it's with a pole, a dip net, a camera, or a net. You know, that's the goal, is have that optimum yield. And basically, we're going to see what happens. So when you read the paper, it's probably worth, paying attention to it, because if you're involved in the economy of the Kenai Peninsula and this leg of the seafood economy gets taken out underneath it, the consequences of that are unknown, but I'm willing to bet it's not going to be exactly positive. There are a lot of people who would like to see us return to the 2nd largest natural sockeye you can run in Alaska. I know I'd like to have grandkids one day that might want to do that. That'd be good. So that's very quick, but I wanted to not be somber or not be a downer, but we're all in business. We all face regulations, and we all are subject to agencies making decisions. And I think the key is, as long as we understand what the rules are, we can play by them and have our business and our industry be successful. These types of uncertainties are not uncommon, but with respect to the Kenai Peninsula, it's fairly significant, and it's very much worth watching. I don't even like to eat salmon. I like halibut, okay? But salmon put my kids through college. How many people in this room participated at some point in your life as a kid? It's a cannery, fishing. There you go. It's it's very real. So thank you, Tim, for letting me be a downer on a happy, positive day. I don't mean to be. I always think the future's bright. You know, it's going to warm up. Just wait. Days are going to get longer. But I want to thank the City of Kenai and the City of Homer. They've been engaged, and they're trying to step in. I don't think it's too little too late. So as your industry watches, pay attention, because if they come after one industry, they come after yours. Thank you.
That was perfect.